Hello everyone and welcome to the first ever live stream for the Great War Western Front. I'm Bruce, one of the community members over at Frontier Foundry, and I'm here joined today by Arthur to tell you a little bit more about the game. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. Very, very excited to get a first look. We've seen it. We have seen this game before, but I'm very excited to share it with you all for the first time. Been keeping an eye on this for quite some time, so thank you very much for having me on board, Bruce. Excited to get going.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to play through the game and show you all a little bit of it, as well as have some special guests from Petroglyph Games, the developers of the Great War Western Front. But before that, we'd like to tell you a little bit more about how you can get your hands on it.
So actually, I'm going to step in here because I've got lots of details in front of me, and I'm very excited about one of the things which I'm going to talk about right now. So as you may or may not know from the trailer that we watched going into this stream, the Great War Western Front is available to pre-order right now. So if in the UK and you're using real money, then it's $29.99 for the standard edition. If you're in the US or in Europe, then it's obviously $34.99 in euros or in USD. Now there is a secondary edition, which is called the Victory Edition, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And if you purchase that or pre-order that now, it's $34.99 in the UK and $39.99 in euros and in USD. Now, what do these editions get you? Why should I pre-order? Well, actually, you get 3 days early access. But early access from when? Well, the 30th of March. So we're very pleased to announce that the release date for the Great War Western Front is March the 30th this year. Not next year, this year. So not long at all. But if you pre-order either one of these editions, you get 3 days early access. But the Victory Edition, Bruce, if you actually pre-order the Victory Edition, you get a load of goodies with them. They're all really cool, but I'm going to go through some of them right now. So you get a digital sort of guide which goes through some of the units that you'll be using in the Great War Western Front, which will be very, very useful, and you'll see why in a moment when you start playing the game. You'll also get some desktop wallpaper and some bits and bobs to make your desktop look a bit tidier, a bit neater. But you also get a digital soundtrack that was recorded with the live orchestra and mastered at Abbey Road Studio. But it's by Frank Klepacki. Now, if you know anything about Frank Klepacki, you know obviously this is a man that's very famous for some of the soundtracks. Most notably, I guess, would be Red Alert and Command and Conquer. So the guy is a bit of a hero, and the soundtrack is an absolute banger. So it's worth the pre-order alone just for that. But the game is fantastic, and you're going to get to see it now. And we're going to try not to waffle too much because we've got guests, Bruce. We've got guests.
Yes, like I mentioned, we have two special guests from Petroglyph, and we're going to introduce them now to talk more about the game, and then we'll jump into some gameplay. So, big welcome to Chris and Renato.
How's it going? I'm Chris Becker. I'm the lead designer on the Great War Western Front.
And my name is Renato Orellana, and I'm the content designer.
Thank you.
I'm so glad, Ren, that you said it that way, because my pronunciation was terrible. So thank you so much for stepping in. And you guys are where are you right now?
Right now we're with Petroglyph located in Las Vegas, Nevada, but we're both working from home today.
So thank you very much for joining us.
I'm at the office, but yeah.
You are at the office.
He's at the office.
One of you's working.
I'm at the office.
One of you's working.
This isn't my home. That'd be weird, man.
But thank you so much for joining us and helping us go through some of the details of the Great War Western Front. There's a lot to go through, so we're going to pick your brains. Bruce is going to play through some of the game. And we're going to ask some of your advice. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about the Great War Western Front? Where's it set? What was the design ethos behind it? Chris, I guess that one's for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as its namesake, the Great War Western Front is based on World War I. It takes place on the Western Front, and this was one of the primary fighting grounds in World War I. And so we went into a lot of detail to create that representation for players to experience.
And this is, I mean, yes, it's an RTS, but there's so much more to this, and you'll see that in a moment. But obviously, this war was particularly brutal. But I think the way you've approached this, and we'll see this in a moment, can you talk us through how you've approached sort of relaying the brutality of this war in this game?
Yeah, so one of the interesting concepts we really pushed in this title is the idea that it wasn't a war where anyone really won or lost. I mean, everyone kind of lost in their own way. And so for players to experience that, we're really excited to give that authenticity of what the war actually was and what kind of things were happening during the war.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's steeped in history, and I think when we're going to, you've been very respectful of that, but obviously it's one of the cornerstones of how the Great War Western Front plays out. Ren, how has it been for you working on a title such as this at Petroglyph?
like you want to get excited about this, but like you also have to always remember that there's a level of respect to like everything that we're trying to gamify, right? And that's really why it's difficult to answer. It's like no, it was a challenge. Like how do you make something that was so brutal, and actually exist in the real world, and how do you work with all those themes and elements and make something that's fun? Right. But it was otherwise, it was great. Like you get to work side by side with the other designers, and you just have to like think about how to like come up with these things, right? And especially one of the things I think that, and you guys are going to show it, but like the national will, like that whole concept was something that was a little bit different than most RTSs, and I think it works for the theme of the battle.
Oh, absolutely, and I think you nailed it there. I think the way you guys have approached the subject matter, which is it's a tough one. But you've approached it very respectfully, but also it's the cornerstone of what you've built the entire game around. And you touched on national will, but this really was a war of inches, and I think we'll see this in the game and how you've designed it. And there was obviously a huge cost even to victory. There was a cost. We think of traditional RTS games as there's absolute victory and you just build a huge army and roll it over the enemy base, and there's no real cost to it other than you spent some time. But in this game, you really do reflect on the cost of victory as well as the cost of defeat. So there's a huge amount to talk about. So we've got different modes within the game. Obviously, there's a campaign mode, which we're going to show a little bit in a moment. But there's also historic battles, which is obviously you guys have put together a sort of a list of historic battles from World War I, which players can sort of reenact and see if they can change the fate of history. There's skirmish mode and there's multiplayer mode. And we're not going to go too much detail about those right now, but there'll be more details that will follow shortly for everyone watching. But in terms of one of the taglines about this, you can change history, right? Because you can obviously change the course of the Great War. But we're not expecting things to go. We're not expecting to see jet planes in this game, are we, guys?
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, that's correct. We wanted everything to be authentic, right? So the idea is you can relive history or redefine it. And the decisions you make are grounded in reality. They're kind of, if you take the pilot's seat, so to speak, you can make different decisions than the decisions that were made during the war and see how those might play out. But of course, you can't get jet fighter planes out because that wouldn't have happened no matter what they did, right? That was later. So
much
it's all grounded in reality still.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that speaks to the authenticity, right? That we're trying to give you all the tools that would have been around at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you guys have been at great pains, and you'll see this in the way the units sort of move and what they're capable of. I mean, and we won't. Don't think we've got it in this battle because we're doing it quite early, and we'll come to this in a moment. But there is the misconception that tanks were invincible, and they really, really are not the tanks of what you might imagine today, where you might see a Challenger tank sort of rolling quite happily across the battlefield. These were very much. I think I'm not sure if it was yourself, Ren, or you, Chris, that quoted saying these are bathtubs with wheels that are going across the battlefield, right?
They were challenging in the war and how they were used. They had their effects though, and one of the biggest effects they had was on troops' morale. I mean, you see one of these things coming over the top towards you, and you're going to freak out. But the reality is they broke down quite often, so they're not going to be the game changer that they ended up being in World War II. But in World War I, they do have a big impact on your troops' morale and how well your guys will fight with them or against them.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to talk about in terms of just authenticity and stuff, there is air power in this which you can give commands to, but it's very different to what you would I guess you would claim to be in a typical RTS game. You're not directly controlling these units, and there's a reason for that. And do you want to explain just for the audience why you can directly control your planes in this game?
Oh yeah, so that's actually a pretty interesting one. There were no radios in World War I. Right, so you sent your planes off, you gave them a mission, but you wouldn't find out till they returned whether they accomplished anything or not. So in this game, aircraft is indirectly controlled. So you send them off on their mission, and then they're going to go down and hunt down their targets. But once they're on the map, they're going to do their thing.
Yeah. All right, Bruce. How are you feeling? Are you feeling ready to step into the shoes of
I'm
World
ready to
War I?
go, but with the steady guidance of the experts that we have with us. So before we hop in, there are two levels essentially at which the game is played. The first being the theatre map. Actually, if we dive into the game now, we can start with this. So now that we're looking at the theatre map, could you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at? Maybe starting off by explaining the hex-based system and the regions, perhaps.
Yeah, we actually experimented with different territory layouts, but we found it was a lot easier for players to understand the fairly standard hex grid. You know where you can go, you know where one territory stops or ends. But this is the map that we're using to represent the Western Front in the Great War.
So this is as a from a field perspective. This is the overview of the front line there. You can see all the Allied and Axis forces sort of facing off against each other there. What do the stars represent? Just out of curiosity. So I'm looking at this for the first time. What am I looking at here? I'm seeing different stars in different regions. What do these mean?
Yeah, the stars actually represent the strength of each of the territories. And so to conquer a territory, which, again, as you mentioned earlier, a war of inches, you have to take down each star on the territory. And so if you get a great victory in a battle, that'll remove one star. But the stars will also replenish over time, so you have to continuously push at that territory to take it over. If you let up for a little bit, the stars replenish and you kind of have to start over your assault.
So this really reinforces that the tenet of the war of attrition, the war of inches that this game represents. And now you mentioned there a great victory. There are different versions of victory and loss, right? So can you talk me through a little bit like the different versions of winning and loss?
Yeah. So basically, this is a concept we kind of came up with to help really push the idea of war of inches and battle of attrition and all that. But we call it marginal victories. And the idea is that when you go into a battle, you're not necessarily going to win or lose, but you're going to win or lose by varying degrees. And that's going to change the outcome when you come back to the theater mode. The idea there is that everything's going to cost, no matter what you do. And so when you're in the battle, you have to consider how much that's going to cost. You can come out with a great victory, but it might cost you a lot more than if you had pulled back earlier.
Right, and we're going to see some more of this later on. I'm sure Bruce, you'll be fine, but perhaps if Bruce, I'm sure he'll win. But you can win, and we'll talk about right at the top of the screen. I guess now is a good time to mention the national will. So can you talk us through the numbers we see right at the top of the screen here?
Yeah, so we use national will to kind of represent each side's will to fight, and this is from the people back home and all the politics that were going on at the time. And so almost everything you do has a national will cost to it. And the national will rarely goes up. I mean, if you have a really fantastic victory, it might go up a little bit, but even in most victories, your national will is going to go down. And so it's a competition where you really want the enemy's national will to go down more and more often than yours. Once one of the national will levels will reach 0, that'll signal the end of the campaign. Your side has lost the will to fight, it's over, they're throwing in the hats, and
Yeah.
that would be the end of the campaign there.
I think this is one of the most unique things I've ever seen in a strategy game like this, because it really brings home the fact, and it goes back to one of your core tenets that Ren, you were speaking about, which is obviously being faithful to it and be respectful to what it is. You can win and you can throw forces at the enemy and you can take a territory, but it might cost you so many of your troops that your national will actually goes down further than you would like, right? So over time, you can commit so many forces to a battle, you can actually win the battle but lose the war. Is that a fair way to say it, Ren?
I would say so, yeah. Like, if you want to think about it, like World War I was a time where, all eyes were at this location, right? Mm-hmm. And basically how you perform, how you treated your soldiers, like that affected things back home, right? Eventually people would lose the will to fight. Like they wouldn't even understand anymore what the war was about. And that's kind of like we were trying to convey, mm-hmm. right? You have to be kind of delicate with your actions and try to think strategically, right? Because yes, you want to make sure that you want to win battles, but you basically want to ensure that the enemy kind of what is it like? When they ask you when you get beat up, they always ask you like, well, what does the other guy look like? You basically want that, right? You want the other guy to look a little bit worse, and then hopefully you could bring this conflict to a resolution, right? Because you will go from the beginning to the end, right? Yeah. And along the way, you'll make the best of it, basically.
Yeah. Bruce, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, national will then represents this, essentially it's a resource or a score, if you like, that you want to really bear in mind whenever making your strategic decisions, mm-hmm. which battles to go into, when to commit more, when to pull back, and all that sort of thing. And we'll talk about the ways you can do that in a bit. But in terms of the overall campaign, What other win conditions are there for ending the war?
You could also actually take your opponent's capital. I guess we call it what, capital city. Like for example,
Capital
the Allies have
territories
Paris.
is what we
yeah,
call them.
yeah. So Chris, you could speak to that, but basically there's Paris, and then there's Krusnich, Snatch, it's Krusnach.
Yeah, Krusnak. And so the idea is you can push forward and capture the capitals, and this is what both sides were trying to do in history, and this is one of the ways you can kind of redefine history is by actually capturing the capital. But it's definitely going to be no small feat. I mean, if you look at all the stars along the way there, you can zoom in and see that there's a lot of different paths to go, but a lot of battles you're going to have to win. And also consider that your opponent's going to be pushing back at you at the same time. You have limited forces to defend that front line, and so if you're making a push for the capital, you're probably leaving somewhere else pretty weak.
It's going to take quite the general to get all the way to the capital, I would have thought.
But it is definitely possible.
It's possible, and one thought on that too is like something that maybe will come up in explanation later is that every point, the battles actually don't happen they happen at the intersections of the regions, right? So if you were to actually push as far as you could, what you end up creating is that now you create a situation where you have more people, more enemy regions are able to attack and whittle down your stars within a turn. So you run that risk.
So do you mean somewhere like Verdun, for example, at the moment is a little bit extended, we can see, into enemy territory? The front line sort of curves towards Germany's side.
Yeah, and it's strategically, it can be a pretty big risk to create a long salient because then you have more forces pushing in more directions. And one of the ways we really kind of push back on how much of a slog this war could be is we have this concept called battle fatigue. And so every time a territory is engaged in a battle, they'll take a morale hit for the rest of that turn. And so what that means is if you can hit a territory from multiple directions, you can stack that battle fatigue on that territory and coordinate your efforts. So being surrounded can be really, really dangerous as you're pushing forward.
The level of depth in this is insane because you can obviously, like you say here, there's so many different strategic approaches to this. So if you're planning, say you're the defenders here, say we're the Axis forces and we want to push back, we can start with our weaker forces to whittle you down just to get you into combat, stack that morale, and then hit you last but not least with our biggest force to guarantee a greater victory. There's a huge amount. I mean, we're stacked for time, and I'm going to try and rush through some of this stuff. But even the weather affects your troops, right? So if it's raining, it affects the artillery, and it's not as effective. If it's cold, the ground's harder. Talk us through a little bit why you've gone through this sort of level of detail. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on there, and we really wanted the experience to be authentic. Part of bringing that emotional engagement in was representing all the things that these armies had to fight through, all the aspects they had to deal with, and the weather is definitely a big one of those. And again, so if you're pushing and you're trying to take a territory and whittle down their stars, that might take 3-4 turns. But you might want to plan that in the spring so you don't get caught in bad weather. Bad weather is just not good for anyone to fight in. But if you put yourself in a situation where you haven't been able to take that territory, but you need just one more turn, but then you're rolling into the fall and the winter, you might be in trouble.
Yeah, and again, just to show, because that brings us on to the point. I mean, a turn is not; it's a month. It's a month's time, right? So every turn we play here is a month. So again, another level of strategy about moving your troops across, reinforcing certain areas, and deciding when you're going to start this concerted effort to take a territory. It's really have to think it through, right? Because if you're putting in loads of artillery and you pick the wrong time of year or you get heavy rain, you're not in a good place.
Yeah, exactly. And with the idea of each turn being a month, it wasn't like they had trouble getting across to where they needed to go within a month. So troops can move anywhere they want, but they won't be available until the next turn. They'll have to arm up and get ready to go. But you can move any troops from any territory to any other territory. And this really reinforces, like with the rail travel and how they were moving troops back then, it really contributed to locking down that front line.
Yeah, like France was a developed region, right? Like it had transportation and everything. So it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Sorry, Bruce, you want to jump in there now?
No, that's great. And looking at the theatre map again, there's a lot of detail here, and obviously we won't be able to go into all of it today, but to capture some of the main points, could you talk us through the resources that we see in the bottom left, as well as the research and tech trees as well? Because we mentioned earlier that you're able to develop your technologies and give yourself an edge in the war, and maybe even go in a different direction than the Allies or the Central Powers did historically.
Yeah, of course. So the two resources, primary resources, are your gold reserves, and this represents kind of your faction's war chest and your factories back home that are producing, and then we have supply, which is your munitions. So when you're in a battle, shooting artillery or placing fortifications down, you'll be spending your supply there. And so what you end up doing is you have to convert your gold supply into your supply for the battlefields, and how you do that can change how things play out. So, for example, you would use your gold reserves to acquisition tanks or aircraft, but then you need the supply to use them in the battlefield as you're fighting these battles out. So how you balance those two resources out is going to change how you might play out your strategies.
Sure.
Further.
Sorry, Ren, go on.
Oh, sorry. May I add something? Yeah, and furthermore, gold reserve. So this level, the theater level, is turn-based, right? So gold also is something that you get at the top of each turn, right? So you kind of have to figure out how to manage that. And, in some situations, you may not want to spend all that gold. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or you to stock it up a little and then go heavy on the supply the next turn after you see what the enemy does. So there's a level there of, hey, here's your income for the turn, and then spend wisely.
I feel like
this actually also goes back to the marginal victories as well. So when you're taking those losses on the battlefield, you have to replenish all your troops' losses, and that comes right out of your gold reserves. So it definitely plays into the strategy. If you're taking a lot of losses, it's going to affect your economy.
Yeah.
So another reason to be conservative and maybe not push that little extra bit when you could, or just being careful and strategic about when you go for it.
I think as well, it's one of the things that I when we talk about it, it's what sets the Great War Western Front apart from every other type of real-time strategy game or strategy game you may have played in the past. You really have to learn this game like no other game. It plays entirely, there'll be mechanics you're familiar with, but there's a whole level of strategy here you have to think about in terms of where you're moving your troops, how you're paying for your troops, what you research, when you time your attacks, what level of victory. If you approach this game as we did the first couple of times we played it, like a normal RTS, oh, don't worry, we just build a base with loads of tanks and roll them in, you will lose pretty quickly and you will lose pretty rapidly, and it's quite brutal when you do lose on the battlefield.
It's about spinning multiple plates and making sure it's all coordinated.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the tech tree. Should we have a little peek at the tech tree, and then maybe the guys can advise us what we might want to be researching. So this is the different areas that we've got here. Do you want to talk us through the areas just really briefly? Bruce, you want to zoom out just slightly there for us? We have a little look. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, we have 6 primary different areas. And to go through them briefly, intelligence is kind of like your spycraft. There's a whole kind of meta game just around that. Infantry is your arms, how strong your troops are going to be. There's even upgrades there to provide them with gas masks if gas warfare becomes part of your experience. Then, of course, we have flight, which is self-explanatory. That's your aircraft. Trenches are going to be your primary defensive fortifications when you go into a battle. Engineering is where you get your artillery, and then down the line later you can get tanks to support your troops. And then logistics is all about your economy and how you're going to move forward and pay for all these good toys you want to use.
So you can, you mentioned the gas mask, and obviously artillery has different levels of research as well to give you gas artillery and stuff like that, which was used unfortunately in this war, but it's a fact that it is in the game. So if you don't research gas masks for argument's sake, and the enemy does, you could find yourself losing simply just by the way you've not really adapted your research to match what the enemy is throwing at you, right? So this in itself is yet another strategic layer for this game.
Well, something that I wanted to add here, the tech tree is one of the major parts that kind of speaks to making the war your own, changing the course of history. As in, for example, if you were playing through the German campaign, right, you could potentially try to get tanks out earlier than in history. Right, and change it that way and see how that would play out.
I think this is incredible. Like it's a really interesting aspect of this game, and it's one of those things where it's not as simple as just oh yeah, it's the next thing to click and learn. It's not. You really have to think about how you're playing your war and then adapt it to how the enemy is also playing, because they're not just sitting there, right? The enemy is not just sitting waiting for you to attack. They are also pushing you back.
Yeah, exactly. And Ren absolutely nailed it. This is one of the big ways where you can redefine how the war plays out. If you want to try and get tanks out significantly sooner than they actually appeared in the war, you can go ahead and do that. But it could be at the cost of your economy or your infantry strength or your defenses. And so that may come back to haunt you in different ways. And it's really up to the player to experiment how they want to experience this war. And then, of course, they can always play it relatively similar to how the war itself played out. They can time their researches and say, hey, this is the authentic experience I want, so I'm going to play it out that way. But it's also a sandbox for players to experiment.
Cool. All right. So, Bruce, you've got some points to spend. Where should we spend them?
I was going to say, so we're about to hop into a battle. Do you have any recommendations just to get us started to help us win this first fight that we go into?
Yeah, I would definitely say get some infantry upgrades. That's going to make a significant difference in your ability to get across no man's land, which we'll see can be pretty brutal. So this will help your guys be able to traverse that. The other ones you're probably going to want to get is some economic upgrades that'll unlock some structures. So it looks like we already have the first one in logistics, but if we get the one right below it there, yeah, and then that'll give us more money each turn, so that's going to help us out in the long run there. And I think that's probably a good safe way to play in the opening turns.
Great.
All right.
Okay. We'll take those then. In terms of choosing targets to engage in battle then, so we talked a little bit about enemy fatigue, weather, where your troops are and that kind of thing. So I'm looking around the map, and I know when you select a target, let's say we start at Bar-le-Duc and want to go into Metz. When we select that, it starts off with a screen here where we can see things like our resources going into the battle, a prediction of how the battle would go, and if we have intelligence, for example, we can also see more details about the enemy. I would probably avoid one like this, looking at it.
It's not looking great for you there, Bruce. I mean, you're looking at.
So, in terms of choosing targets, then, are there any that stand out? It might be a bit hard to ask that at the top level like this, but where should we be looking?
You've got 3 stars and 2 stars. How are we looking there?
What do we think about this one? Luneville to Colmar, perhaps?
That one's going to be a bit tricky because you only have one corps in that region, so
Sure.
you're not going to be able to fill out your trench line very effectively, and you won't have much to push with.
Okay, so
you're definitely going to want
troops.
more guys. One thing you really want to consider is how much supply you're going to be able to bring into the battle. And so supply is granted by a combination of your available corps. They bring their supplies that they're carrying with them. But then you can also build supply depots in the territory that will give you more as well. I'm thinking like Ypres up there is looking like a good place to push out from, especially because we know the Central Powers are pushing hard on Ypres, but maybe we can get ahead of that and push out into the Central Powers territory.
So let's have a look what we got, Bruce.
Okay. All right.
That's
Feels
much better.
Feels better.
Feels better. It feels more your wheelhouse here,
If we were
Bruce.
thinking more long-term strategy, you mentioned earlier that if you can get multiple adjacent territories, that will help us make a sustained attack over the campaign as well. So maybe this is a better target.
Yeah, and in a longer term play session, you would probably want, this would be a great target because you would hit it 2 or 3 times, and each time you hit it, their morale is going to go down due to battle fatigue. And so chaining your attacks together on these territories is definitely something you want to focus on as you're playing.
All right. Shall we jump in and then we can talk a little bit about...
I'm excited to watch you take the field here, Bruce. So there's and again, we'll get to see there's more to this than just units in the field and running across, which we're going to see right now. So we're looking at some reason information here. So this is great. So here's your forces available there, on the bottom left. We've got the battle conditions, we've got region information, and we're about ready to go, Bruce. And there's a little overview of the map in the top right-hand corner. So you feeling confident?
I think I've got good
Well, don't
guidance
change your mind now,
around me.
because before the stream you told me you were going to do this. You told me you were
I'm
going to
confident in
worry.
the,
You said this
in the
is going to be
support that I
fine.
have. So yes. All right. So I noticed that I'm not immediately battling anybody. Could you tell us a little bit about this phase that we're in and what we're looking at now, and how we prepare for a battle?
Yeah, so like in the theater commander mode, each turn represents a month. Before the battle, we have a pre-battle that represents a month as well, and this is the time your guys were digging out their troops, laying down their armaments, and getting ready to go. And as you can see on the map, there are some trenches, the blueprints here, that are already laid out, and these are trenches that would have been there from previous battles. So every time you play a battle on the same battlefield, your trenches and other persistence will be remembered. And so as you get later and later into the war, these trench networks can get quite a bit more complex and change the strategy, how it plays out.
So
Yeah, and that kind of.
Sorry, Ren,
Sorry.
please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that kind of also plays to the idea of maybe sometimes the strategic idea of sometimes going attacking for the main purpose of building up the trench lines for like a future attack, right? Especially since a trench, for the most part, I know we kind of throwing it about, but basically a trench will allow you to position units in it and protect them from incoming artillery. But for the most trenches have a firing step where units could actually shoot out of. So a lot of the time you'll be coming in here. As you look around the map, you can see that there's like A, B, C, X, Y, Z. So those are kind of important, at least at this point. Those are strategic locations. They're represented by a letter, and then for the most part, taking those points will be very detrimental. Like they'll gain you a lot of points. So that's a thing. And then if you kind of look all the way at the back, you see an icon that has like the Central Powers flag. Right, that kind of shows you where the command trench. Yeah, so that is the enemy's command trench. So that kind of gives you a, when you're putting down your trench lines in pre-battle, you kind of want to hover around these points, try and make sure that they're defended.
But the command trench
these-
is what you don't want to lose, right? If you lose that, then it's bad times.
Yeah,
It's bad
all
times.
these points play into the concept of the marginal victories that we were talking about before. And if you lose all your control points and your command trench, that would be a great victory, and that's when you'll lose a star at the theater commander level. So you definitely don't want to lose everything. Or if you're pushing to try and take a territory, you're going to want to figure out the best way to set up your assaults so you can take all the points and get that star knocked down.
Oh, right. So I guess
Well, I'm going to set a modest but reasonably challenging target, which will be to capture one control point then. Should we make that the objective?
I think that's a fair objective to
right.
go for. Which one are you going for, Bruce?
I'm interested in... Ooh. See, I'm looking at Z, but I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't want to side seat like general here, but I would advise not going for the one in the middle, like because it's at the middle and it's
Not
at the back.
the middle sounds
So
good.
I would say it's probably a bad choice.
I'm actually, the more I think about it, I think I like sort of an A to X
That's
attack.
bold.
I think.
Okay, right in front of the command trench. All right. Well, look, victory and victory, loss and loss. We're going to show it regardless, right? Whether you
We'll
win
go
or not.
for it. We'll go for
You're
it.
going to go for it. So you're going to start laying down some trenches,
Sure.
Bruce, right?
So what should I be bearing in mind when I am laying down trenches?
Yeah, so trenches
money.
are what's going to keep your
Supply.
money. Trenches are what keeps your troops alive, right? And when your troops are outside of trenches, they're very incredibly vulnerable. But yeah, you definitely want to keep in mind how much cash you have, and that goes back to the whole supply and how much you're bringing into the battles. But keeping your trenches connected is generally a good idea because it means you can move your troops where they need to be. But at the same time, if the enemy is able to get into your trench line, they'll start using your trenches against you. And that's one of the really fun parts about this game, though, is you kind of make your stand, you get in their trenches, and then you're hopping from trench to trench to trench, clearing them out as you go towards your objectives.
So that's a really
but-
interesting point. Oh, sorry, just to cut in there, I think because Ren mentioned it in a call previous, it's about when you're setting out your trench lines, there's ways and strategies, and Ren, you're a big fan of building redundancies. It's just in case the people do get into your trenches, you don't want them running through your carefully laid out network, right?
Exactly. Like I tend to like to build like I'll have a front line, and then I'll have maybe like 2 points that enter into the next line of trenches, right? And then maybe put like a machine gun or something nearby, or station a company there, or in that way I could kind of control. So if I do get overrun, there should be a way to like fall back and then stem the enemy from like flowing into your system, right?
So I noticed we have these smaller comms trenches,
Yes.
which help with that. Can you tell
So-
us about those?
Yeah. So you have in this example, you have two types of trenches, right? The ones on the left, those are your firing trenches. Those are the ones, they have a population of 2. So what that means is that allied companies that you put in there, you could basically put one on the firing step to fire, and then one sits in the back as reserved, right? And these are primarily the ones that are both for offense and defense. Now the little ones, the ones to the right, they're called communication trenches. And what they do is that they don't have a firing step. They just allowed you to travel through, and I do believe they give you a speed boost. So the idea there is that you want to place those in as ways for your companies to kind of move around the trench lines, right? Also, too, you cannot get into a fight inside of a comm trench. And what I mean by that is that any firing trench, if the enemy's ever able to make it over the top, your company's actually, and you have companies there, they'll actually engage in melee to see who actually gets to stay. So there's that.
And obviously we're in the early part of the war here, and we haven't done much research. So obviously you can expand upon all the different types of trench you can get. So there's blockhouse trenches and stuff like that go along. Obviously you've mentioned machine gun emplacements. And you can see some items here which will be grayed out. Now I know we're short on time, and we'll have a lot more to show later on. But there's stuff like artillery and stuff we'll pop down, and how it can be used effectively in machine gun nests. But it really is thinking about laying out your trench line, not just for this battle, but then for the battles of the future, right? Because, like I said, very rarely are you going to take a territory in one turn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You'll be able to sell off some of the stuff that was there, right? So you'll be able to reorganize based on what your plan is, potentially at a detriment, right? Because you've been building up on it so much.
When you come in for future battles, you'll also be further in the tech tree, and so then you can upgrade your trenches. And upgraded trenches will give you more protection from artillery barrages or what have you. There's also blockhouse trenches, which are immune to artillery. So if there's gas attacks or artillery barrages coming in, you can hide your guys in the blockhouse and then bring them out before the charge, that kind of stuff.
All right, so Bruce is now just
Definitely
going through putting
placing
some.
up these trenches.
He's putting some of his troops in some of the trenches, and obviously he's going to be pushing for. You said you're going for X, right, Bruce? So I guess you're stacking the majority of your forces on the left-hand side of the map here, ready to
Yes.
sort of go over the top.
I noticed that as I place more troops in the trenches, this number is also going up. Can you tell me a little bit about command cap?
Yeah, so that's basically the amount of units you can bring on the screen. So all your infantry and your tanks will count towards
The
that.
artillery.
And your artillery as well, yep. And so that's kind of what forces you to control your pushes, and you have to be really cognizant of that, because as you're pushing, the enemy is going to be able to reinforce his side faster than you're going to be able to get your reinforcements in.
So, and again, now in terms of the unit caps, Bruce now flicked over to my favourite screen, which is the artillery and the machine gun nest. So now, because Bruce is attacking, would you recommend he focuses more on artillery than placing machine gun nests, or would you still recommend putting some machine gun nests down?
You probably want a couple machine gun nests down, because the AI will push back. If you leave one side weak or something, the AI is going to push back at you. So having a couple around just to help defend when the AI counter pushes is not a bad idea. But on your strong side where you're pushing from, definitely you're going to want to lean more on artillery. And as you can see, these machine gun nests, they have kind of an arc of fire. And so when you're playing defensively, what you'll want to do is try and set up kill zones where the arcs overlap, and that can make it very, very difficult for the enemy to cross no man's land.
Yeah. I imagine players will get very adept at this, and they'll create some incredible sort of some trench strategies in here. And you can see the ranges on this are very realistic as well. Like, this is not these aren't short. This is a machine gun. This has got quite a range on it. So we'll talk about cover in a moment. If your troops are walking into this range without cover, it's not going to go very well for them.
Oh yeah, it's definitely brutal, and that's one of the big things when you're playing as a field commander, how you navigate these challenges. As Bruce said earlier, it's a lot of spinning plates. So what you're going to want to do as you're making your charge is you want to lay down that suppression fire. You want to give your troops as much opportunity to get across no man's land as they can. And one of the ways you do that is you lay down that suppression fire. There's different types of artillery shots, and then there's light artillery and heavy artillery that have different abilities as well. For example, you may lay down a smoke screen that your guys can run through and they're going to take a lot less damage, or you can put down the suppression fire. We even have rolling barrages, which is actual strategy that was used in the war, where you have rows and rows and rows of artillery shots that your troops run behind, and it just obscures them as they're coming across no man's land.
And again, this is where the real-time strategy really comes in, because again, as commander at this stage, if you mistime that and get that wrong, much like, historically, and there is some very famous battles like Gallipoli, I guess being the most famous one, if you mistime your charge and that barrage has ended or has not started, you are literally throwing men into machine guns, and it will end pretty quickly for you. So no pressure, Bruce. All right, we're all going to be watching you lay down your troops. Now, just before we get into the battle as such and it goes, I just want to remind everyone, if you've just joined us, thanks for joining. This is our first stream of the Great War Western Front. We're joined by the awesome Chris and Ren from Petroglyph Games. It's available to pre-order right now on Steam and on Epic, and the game releases on March the 30th. However, if you do pre-order either the Victory Edition or the Standard Edition, you will be able to get 3 days early access to the game. If you want to know how much it costs, then the Standard Edition is $29.99 in British pounds. In USD and in euros, it's $34.99. And if you want to order the Victory Edition, it's $34.99 UK. $39.99 euros and USD. It comes with a slew of digital extras, including sort of a digital unit guide, some desktop wallpaper, and an awesome digital soundtrack by the incredible Frank Klepacki, which was mastered at Abbey Road and recorded with a live orchestra, which I may have mentioned several times at the start of the stream because I think it's amazing. So, Bruce, have you given everybody a suitably inspiring speech?
I think so. I think the troops are ready. So I'm going to click begin battle and we'll go for it. Right off the top, what do I need to achieve during the battle? So I know that we want to claim one of the control points. That's going to be what I go for, this victory. But generally speaking, in battles like this, what are the, I hesitate to call them win conditions, what are the ways in which battles might end? So what could cause the end of a battle?
Well, the first thing I want to bring up really quick, I would say is if you notice that you have I would say pause, use the pause button beneath your minimap, right? So that way we could talk and your timer doesn't go down. Because that timer in the center of the screen there, that one is basically like the, what do we call it, mission daylight or the operational time. Basically, that's one of the ways that will just kind of shut down the instance if you basically let that timer go all the way down. Now that we've kind of paused it, right, the next big thing, and I'll let Chris kind of explain this, but above the timer, there's a very important piece that kind of is going to allow you to kind of figure out, have I achieved my goal? Has my goal gotten worse, right? So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so at the top there's a score bar, and there's a few pieces of important information there, but the main one is the top checkerboard, and that kind of measures the tide of the war, who's winning, who's losing, and if the battle were to end at this moment, what kind of victory you could expect. You can see it kind of leans to the Central Powers a bit here, and that's because the onus is always on the attacker. You got all your troops ready, you started this attack, and if you were to say, I don't want to fight, you just demoralized all your troops. So the attacker always starts at a disadvantage and has to make that push to overcome it. Okay. And then, of course, the final way to end a battle, which was mentioned earlier, is to capture all of the control points as well as the command trench. And that would be what we define as a great victory that removes the star at the strategic level.
But I think, again, the most unique...
Wait. I do want to add one more thing. There's also the ability to do a ceasefire. Like if there's if you look at the right hand, lower right hand, basically, if you ever get to a point where you just want to end it, that will officially give the other side the, hey, we're done, right? And then I think the AI could refuse that, right, in this situation? Is that correct, Chris?
The player can refuse it from the AI if you want to keep pushing your attack.
Okay.
But since AIs don't have feelings, we figure we give the player the edge on this one. It's a very difficult game already, so we give the player a little bit of an edge here.
So there's a couple of things there. I mean, Bruce, when you're ready, obviously feel free to crack on. I'm sure the guys will let you know how well you're doing. But one of the great things there, I mean, obviously, I'm sure the pause button would have been greatly appreciated in history. But there's one of the defining factors you do have. But again, just to reiterate, this is the great thing about the Great War Western Front, which makes it so unique when it comes to these type of strategy games. In fact, you as a player define your own victory. You decide when is enough, and your ego can, of course, push you to a loss. Your ego can literally snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, right? You can get to a point and think, I'm going to keep going, I'm winning so much, and then you end up taking so many losses, you end up losing. So we're off when we're moving, right?
We are off.
Yeah.
So we're moving towards Control Point X, but I noticed there's a lot of trench very nearby it, and due to the fog of war, I can't quite see it yet, so I am preemptively trying to clear it a bit.
Right, which is a
good
great
strategy?
tactic, because it is, because
Yeah, this-
artillery tends to suppress enemy companies, so they won't be able to fire at you.
Nope. And it looks like,
looks like
the
they
AI
were
is
making
doing
a
a
push for
counter
you,
push.
yeah.
So the AI will do this from time to time, where it'll actually send troops out to kind of scope you out for weaknesses, to find out where to counter push.
You're trying to make
You're
it to
trying
that
some preemptive.
forest.
I'll watch your troops, Bruce. Look, without fire, they are running into trenches. So this will show you the brutality of this war. They are not going to get very far here.
Yeah.
And that.
Oh, they're almost there.
And that is that. That is that.
Did not get in.
Timing is so important, and as long as you can keep those guys suppressed, you're basically trying to give your guys every advantage you can to get them across that no man's land.
Sure.
All right. So we know that's
here's a
scout.
here's a little tip too. Like, I think you would have made it into that trench, except that you didn't trust your defenses. Because the
Okay.
guys that were coming towards you, I would have just left them alone. They would have gotten
Yeah,
basically
you see it right
mowed
now.
down.
They're
by
getting
the
mowed
dudes.
down here. Yeah, they're not making it.
Yeah. So that's kind of thing to keep in mind, right?
Okay.
It's great that the enemy is sending them directly where you put most of your defenses. So that's awesome, right? So yeah. Go ahead.
Should we go for another push?
I think you're gonna have
Send
to,
another
Bruce.
wave.
You said that you're
have
gonna
to,
take it. I'd keep going where you were before and keep hammering that line
The
of
only thing I
artillery.
notice is if we go here, there's a lot of defense that can shoot. I think my approach angle was not great before because I was so open. Whereas if I go to the end of a trench here,
You're the general. I trust you,
if I go to
Bruce.
the end of the
That's
trench,
fair.
then
I trust
The
you.
other
I've
thing
got-
that can help is where you aim your artillery, you can actually hit multiple trenches.
Okay.
If you kind of get the connection points, and that'll suppress
Yeah.
those
Would that be
trenches.
here-ish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That definitely
Now,
helps
the
because
only-
you'll get both trenches suppressed there.
The only issue I would say with your way of thinking makes sense, but you're not considering that there's a whole more stuff to the right of the map,
Right.
So
Yeah.
potentially you're trying to go to that trench, but you might be in range of other trenches that are nearby.
Okay.
So later on in the game, as technology sort of moves on, and one of the things I noticed on the research tree for air power was the balloon, the observation balloon. So
Yes.
these are vital, I guess, in the later part of the game
Yes.
of scouting out enemy lines, so we avoid this situation. Unfortunately, at this stage of the war, this is what we've got available to us. But there's nothing to stop Bruce actually of researching that observation balloon first, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Getting those observation balloons out is huge. Not only does it show you where their trenches are, but you can see what troops are actually in the trenches.
Nice.
If you notice, you don't know who's in the trenches. You just know that you're taking fire until you get up close enough to see what's in there. And so there could be a whole bunch of different guys in those trenches. But the balloons will actually let you see
Surrender.
right into the trenches, and you'll know what you're up against.
So, whilst we were talking, Bruce has pulled off an incredible maneuver,
He
and his
has.
troops are actually in the trench line of the enemy forces. So we really want to be moving on, right, to capture X, right? But the other thing to bearing in mind is Bruce is going to be sending his force up to reinforce here, but that leaves those trench lines back at home on the left-hand side pretty empty. Do we want to be moving any forces from the back there, Bruce, up using those com trenches?
That's a good idea. I'll do that.
Yep.
So we'll filter up from the back, and they'll be like I say, making use of the extra
Because
comms trenches.
Yeah,
if they
they're
weren't,
in a- if
you could
they're
still
in a
move them,
trench,
right,
yeah.
Ren, but they'd be exposed.
Yes, like
Yeah.
you could go over the land, But yeah, then if there's an artillery attack, they'll take more damage than if they were inside. And plus, you want to use the benefits of traveling through the trench line.
So Bruce is he's making some maneuvers here.
You popped them out. Put them back in. There you go.
Coming in now.
There we go.
Bruce I see what you're
good.
trying to do there. You've also effectively actually managed to shell that other trench line, and now we're going into a bit of inter-trench warfare. So the units are now engaged in the trenches, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
and I have my
they're
other
trying to
guys
make
just
it in.
arriving as well. So
Now
that's-
send those guys to another trench because that trench is full. There you go. Perfect.
Sure.
So you see the enemy and yourself have engaged in fisticuffs right there.
Okay, I have them outnumbered,
that's
so I'm
perfect.
confident that we'll win this.
I think you've got
Yes.
this. Yeah, this is going to be. It's a good little staging area now, and now we're moving in, and we're sort of taking control of X. But you're also, I'd imagine, if the AI will probably be redistributing some of its forces because you're getting very, very close to its command trench at the back there, so it's not
You're
going
taking
to.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so
Now
there's
here's a
no
really
one-
quick thing. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of that, there you go. That's the area of influence when taking a control point. So as long as the enemy isn't in there, that little thing will advance. But conversely, you want to put more companies within that ring. So I would move that company that's right there to the right. Just move them up one. There you go.
Oh, but
Oh, they're
again,
gonna get
there we
attacked
go.
from the
So I
rear.
thought this might happen. So obviously you are
Yeah,
very
you
close
got
to
to
their
be
command
careful
trench.
when you're moving your troops though too, because you just moved them through a full trench, which meant they had to get out
They have
to
to
go
leave,
around.
and now they're getting
So what
Yeah.
you
Okay.
kind of want to do is leapfrog them. So you would have
Move the other.
generally what I do is I'll move the closest guys up and then move the next guys behind them and behind them and behind them. Because yeah, when the trench is full, your guys are going to have to get out to go around it, and then that leaves them exposed, as you just saw. It'll destroy them pretty quickly.
But I mean, I'm not going to give Bruce too much of a hard time here. I mean, he's fighting the early days of the war here, but you can see that toggle at the top there, that checkered bar, is not where we need it to be at all. We're still looking at, I guess, a minor loss at the minute, and we kind of need to move that a bit further on. But this is where we have to start thinking as a field commander. How many troops do we want to throw at this before it's too much? Before we are going to end up giving away too much national will just to capture
Oh, there
X?
it goes.
Oh, but he's got
Sorry.
X. We've got
Yeah.
X, and that is now just moved.
So watch the bar moved. Yeah, exactly. And now what's a
And,
cool
yeah,
thing
so
here
now-
is that now you could reinforce from that point. So instead of having, when you bring reserves in, they'll actually reinforce from to the left of X. So you could actually start filling in more companies, and you might actually want to try to push for that command trench. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say,
yeah.
let's take care of Chris' advice and let's just step up one trench at a time rather than leaping over. This is good.
Yeah.
But you're in a
yeah,
healthy
there you
position
go.
here, Bruce. This is not bad. And
more
they're
guys coming in.
coming in, but you know. Oh, and you're going to get engaged
Oh,
at the
there's
top.
guys coming from
and
the
he's
from the
pushing
top.
up at the top too. So
Yeah, he
yeah,
doesn't
you
like
can
that.
see they're gonna.
Have we?
They
have
don't
we
like that
been
you have X.
overzealous? Have we
I
tried
don't
to bite
think
off
so.
more than we can chew?
Like-
Don't know. I
Well,
think
the thing
you're
is
doing
that
all
if you
right.
just, if you chose to ceasefire now, you would. What is that? Is that that's just a victory, right? A small victory, a minor
It's-
victory?
It might be a minor victory. It's kind of right on the edge of minor victory and stalemate. So it would be interesting how it plays out. But you still have the question of the more you push and the more losses you take, you're going to have to pay for those. So you could go for a stronger victory here, but it's going to cost you more at the strategic level in theater command.
And this is it, right? I mean, this is where the temptation and the ego of a commander could get the better of them here, because that command trench is right there, Bruce. It's right above you, but it's
It
not.
is right there.
You could take it, but at what cost? And yes, you might get a star off, but how many troops are you going to lose here?
That is the question.
But I know Bruce.
And-
I don't know
and
how
keep in
competitive he
mind-
is.
Keep in mind, the cost isn't just your gold reserves to replenish your troops, but there's also a national will hit for your losses
Yeah.
as well.
I mean, that was pretty brutal. There's a machine gun nest just sitting there. And you just shelled your own troops, Bruce? You have.
He did. He's
That's a war
there.
crime.
I mean,
That's a war crime.
That's not a good look.
that's not a good look for any general, Bruce. I'm gonna go right off the bat and say, look, that's not really playing cricket. But a couple of things to note as well. I mean, we are moving. That bar is moving, but we are taking heavy losses now.
They keep
They are
sending. The fog of war is really getting us because they're really sending troops from this side, trying to make up for the.
Yeah, well, they're worried about that command trench, right? They don't want to lose that command trench, but you're reinforcing, they're reinforcing. We are slowly creeping up. One thing to note as well later on in the game, I'm not sure if it's actually happened now, but you can actually obliterate a trench, right? So that's good and bad, because if you're obliterating a trench you're trying to move through, it will then mean your troops have to move over open ground to get to the next trench. And again, that's not fantastic. So you're going to shell their artillery. That's an interesting maneuver.
Oh, it is. It is. It gives you points. Like destroying their stuff is great.
So
you can also shell and suppress artillery. So as artillery is taking fire, their guys are all hunkered down. They're not going to shoot back. So that's a good way to suppress artillery coming at you.
And one thing to point out here, what you've done, and I think you've done excellently, is the fact that the R2 that we're calling in here, it's not pinpoint. We have an idea of where it's going to go, but there's no guarantee that shell is going to land exactly where it is. So there's none of this precision airstrike stuff. Like as Bruce ably demonstrated a minute ago, just putting the cursor near your troops and thinking it won't hit your troops is folly, because that artillery will land in a general area, which could be in the trench where your troops are. How are you getting on there, Bruce?
You know what? They're putting up a tough fight. They really want to defend this.
It looks like you could move in now.
This area.
Make the run.
Move. Go.
I have cleared them out, I think.
Get in.
Because that command trench, you can't see inside of it until you're actually in, because it's underground. So if they do have any more companies in there, you won't know until you send those guys in.
It's the world's most dangerous game of knockdown ginger.
Oh, dear.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Let's see what's going to happen. I think they might clear
I mean,
out, though.
I think they moved out.
Yeah.
I think they moved out to come and attack you. Let's see.
So let's go. I bring those up to reinforce. Yeah. Let's go.
All right.
Yeah,
so while I
If
try
you
and
could hold
capture
that
this,
area.
Can we just give a quick reminder about what this game is and
Sure.
how to
So
get our hands
so
on
if you're just joining, you've just joined at the moment to see Bruce claim an unlikely victory, it seems, in the Great War Western Front. This is a World War I RTS by Petroglyph Games. It releases on March the 30th, but it is available to pre-order now on Steam and on Epic. It's the standard edition is £29.99 British pounds. 34.99 euros or US dollars, and there is a victory edition which is 34.99 British pounds and 39.99 euros and US dollars. The victory edition and the standard edition are to play 3 days early. That's very effective. Artillery coming in there, Bruce. Impressive stuff. Very brutal. Wow. Sorry, you've stopped me mid trying to do my sales pitch, because that is incredible to see that on screen. That is the brutality of World War I there, accurately reflected in this incredible game. So yes, it's available to buy on March 30th. Pre-order now. 3 days early access if you pre-order. The Victory Edition gives you a load of digital goodies, including a sort of a digital field guide talking about units and vehicles, some desktop wallpaper, and an incredible digital soundtrack by the awesome Frank Klepacki, which was mastered at Abbey Road Studios and was recorded with a live orchestra. So that's worth the pre-order in and of itself. But we are so close to capturing the command center, but they are not giving this up easy, Bruce. I mean, I thought you had it, but you're bringing in reinforcements
I don't know
from...
if I should.
Well, this is it, Bruce. You're so close to victory. Do you want to give it up?
I don't know. I feel like they've sent so many troops at us. It's just going to cost us more and more at this point.
Lay in that artillery. I believe in you, Bruce.
Wait. Your supply. Remember, keep an eye on your supply at the bottom. You're going to run out.
Yeah,
That artillery is becoming quite effective.
it's close.
It's so close.
Effective, but it's expensive. Yeah. You just got to hold them off.
Just a little bit longer, Bruce.
We'll take it.
And then we have it.
We'll take it.
We'll take it. There we go.
Oh my God.
So
call it
Ceasefire immediately.
Ceasefire. There we go. Well done, Bruce.
yes.
That was good.
Well, it was, but let's look at the cost.
Let's see the cost.
So, shall we analyze how I did?
Well, you're going to take it as a victory, because I know sort of general you are, Bruce. So you'll be like victory at all costs. So.
Yes.
Wow.
There we go.
All
There
right.
we go. So that was a good victory.
That was good.
And then you can see the details in the score because you were able to get their command trench. That notched it up to a great victory. But in the battle details, we'll see how much it actually cost. Yeah. So you can see here, you did get a national will increase for the great victory, but you could have got more if you had less losses. So these losses are going to cost you. But you can also see it's going to cost. If you go back to the other screen, you can see there's the gold reserves cost as well. Or there, it was at the top as well. So it's going to cost you 300 of your gold reserves to repay for all those troops.
So,
I don't know. I felt it felt good. Like
I mean, I
I'm not
think
gonna lie.
I mean, apart from the bit where he shelled his own troops, I think Bruce did an admirable job
and those first companies that I sent in to sort of scout a bit.
The first companies you sent in just to die, and then you shelled some of your own. So you could have done that better. But Bruce, well done. That's incredibly. I'm surprised as well as impressed that you managed to actually claim a great victory. I thought I'd be happy with the victory, knowing Bruce. But I'm conscious of time, and we've already done an hour. One thing I do want to point out is obviously everything you're seeing on screen is pre-release footage, so that is not the final game, so it will be subject to some change. So the guys at Petroglyph very, very kindly provided us a build to show you all today. So Chris Wren, thank you so much for joining us on this very special preview stream of the Great War Western Front. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk through what I think is, the history of Petroglyph and how it shaped the RTS genre. I think this game will go some way to shape it even further. I think we've shown just literally the surface details here on the different layers of strategy within the Great War Western Front, from resource management to research. We haven't even touched on espionage and how that affects sort of the units you go into. We talked about morale, but we didn't have time to show it. There's so much to what's in this game. All right, so just to wrap it up and go some details once again, the Great War Western Front releases on March the 30th, but it is available to pre-order today. There are two editions, the Standard Edition and the Victory Edition. The Standard Edition is $29.99 in UK money. It's $34.99 in euros and US. The Victory Edition is $34.99 UK, $39.99 euros and US dollars. Obviously, the Victory Edition comes with the slew of digital goodies, including the digital field guide, including guides to units and vehicles. There's some desktop wallpaper even, and there's also the incredible digital soundtrack by Frank Klepacki, which was mastered at Abbey Road Studios and recorded with a live orchestra. But most importantly, it comes with 3 days extra play ahead of the March 30 release date. But that's not all, Bruce, is it? That's not all we're going to say today for the Great War Western Front. What else is there?
No, so just to finish things up, we've got even more good news for you. If you want to try the game even earlier than that, we're going to be at Steam Next Fest, so you can try out the game for yourself in a demo starting this Monday, it's the 6th of February. So do check the game out there and get your hands on it to get an early taste.
So yeah, great stuff. So, I mean, you just thought we were just going to sign off, but we weren't. We're going to give you access on the 6th, so there you go. Bruce, thanks again for inviting me along. It's been great fun to watch you progressively win. I mean, you did win, but well done again. Thanks to all of our guests. It's been great to have them on from Petroglyph, and I hope you enjoyed the demo on the 6th.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me. And like you say, special thanks to our guests who joined us and, of course, to everyone watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you for more Great War Western Front action in the near future. Bye-bye.